Good morning and welcome to another episode of the OSR Tabletop live stream with DM Bloodworth. And welcome everybody that's coming in. And this week's pretty hot topic, because it's been going on for about 2 weeks now, is this notion, which is like almost like a three times a year, 4 times a year notion that the OSR is dying, or the OSR is already dead, and so on. This is something that comes up, I think, every once in a while when individuals who are not part of the OSR, or individuals who see the OSR as a threat to whatever they're looking to do within the hobby or adjacent to the hobby, which is usually what we do see. If they feel threatened by the OSR and they don't like the fact that the OSR has proven itself to be immune to their small but very loud voices of trying to control it, trying to find, the head of the OSR used to be something that they'd actually do, and I've even seen individuals on Twitter lament that, yeah, I joined various OSR groups and I wasn't able to move them to our way of thinking, or my way of thinking, and therefore they're toxic and we have to change up our methods, and we have to create our own thing. That's when they came out with Sword Dreams, which epically failed, and they kept on trying to reinterpret what the OSR is, and oh, it's a movement, it's not a movement, it's a community. All of these are efforts to try to, again, control, to try to get the OSR, whatever you want to consider it, to function as a single entity, and then to push out those that these outsiders don't agree with. And it's oftentimes it's not an issue of gaming that they don't agree with. It's not like they're talking about the content of the games that that people that utilize the label OSR are it's not the content that they're including in their games, or it's not the mechanics of their games, or the play style of their games. It's the individual author or publisher's outside political views. That's usually what they really object to, and they place these demands on them. It's like, you must say this and this, otherwise we're going to try to have you blocked from attending this convention. Or if this convention invites you as a guest speaker, as we've seen in the last 2 or 3 weeks, well, we need to ban this, we need to boycott this convention, because they obviously don't agree with us. So I'm going to get into a few things, and my premise for this video is to say that the OSR is doing just fine, and a few bad actors, which any movement or any community or any large thing that includes individuals, and essentially tens of thousands, if not hundreds, or possibly even millions of people, is going to have some bad actors. That's without question. But if you are on the outside and you're only focusing on those bad actors, then that's the issue. That's the interjection of, a toxic outlook, because it's like, first see what it's all about and actually participate in it before you make a, blanket declaration that, oh, this thing is dying, or, this thing is being corrupted from within because, three people out of 10,000 are bad actors. All right. So let me check the comments and see who is in. Hello, Ironcaster. How's it going? Nice to see you. So let me go over a few things. All right. So my working definition, and I'm becoming more and more affirmed to this definition. That I'm just going to start with that, so you know what I'm talking about. So I began with the OSR is doing just fine, and here is the proof. So let me identify it first. So the OSR for me, and I think it's been agreed to by many others. The OSR stands for old school role playing, which is the style and feel of actually the way games used to be played. All right, so it's dungeon crawls, and there's actual role playing taking place. There's a little bit grittier, that kind of thing. It's like when you play an old school game and in an old school style, you kind of know it. It's bare bones, not a lot of technology going into it either. And an old school Renaissance game could also be old school role playing. An old school revival game could be old school play style, and even a modern game can still have an old school style of running it. All right, and I will give you examples of each. Old school Renaissance is what most people consider to be the most common interpretation of what OSR stands for. And Renaissance means a rebirth, right? So it's a new game based on the older game IP, or whatever. And I'm going to give you examples of each so that you can see what I'm talking about. And then there's old school revival. And old school revival is actually playing the older editions of games. Now I'm going to make this argument, and I'm going to show you some examples of that, of how all OSR isn't just derivatives of Dungeons and Dragons. All right. And it could be a number of different titles that date all the way back to the mid to late 1970s as well. You could be playing the first edition of Tunnels and Trolls. That's OSR. All right. It's an old school game, and you're playing it. Traveler, which doesn't have any of the conventions of Dungeons and Dragons, is still an old school game, especially if you're playing the first edition of Traveler. That's OSR. I could break out James Bond 2000, James Bond 007 role playing game. All right, if I'm running that, that's old school. All right, came out in the early to mid 80s, and there's no recent printings of it, and so it's an old school game. So various different definitions. I think that all OSR games can fall within any one of these three categories that I'm putting out there, and multiple categories can also be old school role playing. All right, but Renaissance and Revival cannot be combined. But old school role playing can be combined with either of the other two. All right, so additional proof. There are currently 9,089 OSR titles on DriveThruRPG. So this is simply you just go on to DriveThruRPG and you type in the search OSR titles. You get 9,089 hits on just OSR. Kind of hard to argue that that it's dying, all right, or that it's dead when you can find 9,089 titles on Drive-Through RPG. When you go to Roll20, which is probably the most popular VTT out there, and you type in OSR and you do a search, you will get 35 pages of current running either game sessions or campaigns that use the primary tag of OSR. All right. So there's a lot of people producing for the OSR, and there's a lot of people playing OSR titles. Let's check out common. Let's see. So Ironcastle, not even Germ Killer can get 100%. Yeah, they put it right on the bottle, 99.9% or something like that. And it is very few. I will acknowledge that, the one company that the most recent attack was generated on is, they're bad players. They have contributed nothing to the gaming space, and they are they're not even considered OSR by any real standards. Of those 9,000 submissions on Drive-Through RPG, not one of them comes from that company. All right. So to try to tag the OSR in general with the doings of new TSR, I'll just say it, new TSR is disingenuous. All right. They are not part of the OSR. All right. They haven't produced a darn thing. All right. And just because they claim to be OSR doesn't make it so. All right. And that's, the real point that I think we need to make here is that you have outsiders trying to tag the OSR with a toxic label, and declaring that the OSR is dying, and the OSR is or the OSR is dead, or it's got toxic players at its core. That's all coming from the outside. That's coming from people who don't like the freedom that individuals have within the OSR to oftentimes say what they wish to say, or the primary thing that I hear from people who consider themselves to be OSR is just play the game. That's become a toxic statement, to the far left on Twitter for the most part. Is they don't want to hear just play the game. I won't forget that when they were saying, well, we're going to create our own branch of the OSR, all right, and we're going to leave you to yourselves. They didn't even like that, because they knew that they were giving up on that group, and they were basically leaving us alone. And so some of their own members or movement or whatever it was like, oh, no, we can't leave them that space. We have to get that space shut down, because it's not enough to just say, well, you have your space and we'll have our space. No, we want our space and you can't have yours. And that's where they're really coming from. It comes from an issue of control. So let me say hello, Ducato. How's it going? Great game yesterday. It was a struggle. So, and that's another example of OSR, which I will get to, is the campaign that I just started yesterday. Although we had some tech issues and it was a little bit of a bumpy road, it was still a lot of fun. So I will get to that. Let's see. Facebook user. A recent Kickstarter did terribly for 5e, but did really well. An OSC version. Yeah, I mean, there are certain games that are almost within our community because we are a niche, right? The TTRPG hobby is still a very, very small populace. I mean, there's 10, 15, 20 million, in the world that play tabletop role-playing games. And so we are a tiny, tiny, tiny uh hobby in comparison to every other thing. So when you see people angling for market share, in this, a lot of people will go to the tried and true. They'll go to the game system that they've heard the most about, and then they realize that, hey, you know what, this is vanilla. This is, not really what I'm looking for. I want something, I want something old school, or I want something with a little grittier, a dark fantasy, or I want horror, or I want, a variety of things. And so they move around. There is not a there's not a finite space for us to interact in. There's thousands, like I said, there's 9,000 9,000 titles on Drive Through RPG for OSR. There's I mean, some of those are repeat titles, but for the most part, there's thousands and thousands of game systems out there for you to try out. So yeah, something might not work with one game system, and so but it does work better in another. So yeah, Kickstarters are that try to just go with one particular uh, game system are not going to do that well, or as well, if they don't diversify. Monster Manual by Jeremy Hart. Not sure. I guess maybe that's who it was for. Good day, Indigo. Twitter doesn't matter because it's not a real place. A great community by Dave, comment by Dave Chappelle. Blah. Sorry, I can't talk. Twitter is an echo chamber for idiots. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to go to Twitter. I barely go to Reddit, which is another place that tends to be, especially in the OSR space, from what I hear, because I've probably gone there less than 20 times. And but yeah, Twitter, it's good to see what it's good to see how people are attacking the things that you like, or how people support the things that you like. And I've never found that I kind of get into that kind of an echo chamber, because um I do really bounce around to different groups, and people with different interests, and so on and so forth. So it's harder for me to think about what it's like to be in an echo chamber, because I just don't gravitate towards that kind of a thing. Now, I certainly lean in certain areas, but I don't get trapped in them. All right, and that's just because I'm older and experienced, and so on. I've never really chose to be trapped in any one particular mindset. I guess it is, and it's very reminiscent of the Satanic Panic, because it's an attempt, just like what they did with the comic industry, comic book industry. It's an attempt to destroy it. It's move in, destroy it. I've seen the graphic oftentimes. It's like, notice a thing, infiltrate the thing, make it your own, and then destroy the thing, and then rinse and repeat. And then that's kind of what they look, to do is like, oh, I forgot to, kick out those that were here before me, and then destroy the thing. So that's the title of the thing, and I've seen it. Um, I've seen it. I wish I had that graphic to show, but yeah, that's the way that they operate. That's how they destroyed the comic book industry. That's how they destroyed major IPs like Star Wars to a certain extent. Marvel, the Marvel universe, and so on. It's like they just infiltrate and destroy. They cannot build their own because they don't have that creativity. So it's easier to, destroy what's out there and make it your own. And then it's always a lesser product. Yes, once we got it going, it was fun. Yeah, absolutely. I'll talk a little bit about that. Let's see. I rarely visit Twitter anymore. Lately, it has been a check out what the troll lords are up to. Yeah, and I mean, you could follow troll lords, everywhere else on Facebook or which is also occasionally a cesspool, but it's less a cesspool than Twitter. And you could also follow them on YouTube as well. Hello, Lionel. How's it going? Glenn, how's it going? The OSR is bulletproof. Yeah, I mean, it is because it doesn't have a head. It has there's 10,000 tables running OSR. How do you control that? You know, and they really don't even have those that are trying to attack it don't even have a true understanding of what the OSR is, and they don't even know what kind of games to attack, or game publishers to attack when they do so, because they're not attacking it again based on the game content. They're attacking or the game mechanics. They're attacking it based on some perceived political stance that the author or publisher has. And this applies to conventions as well. They will probably start hating on small conventions, all right, because small conventions are happy to have 100 or fewer players, or 100 few participants attending it, and you can't control something that small. It is so far off the mainstream radar that they can't shut it down. And what are they going to do to someone who's running a 100-person convention? You know, um, you're going to stop me from renting some small little hall space in some tiny little town, and prevent a bunch of let's be honest, to have a bunch of 50-year-olds show up to play role-playing games. How are you going to stop that? Try to tell a 50-year-old you can't do this. Right? It's like, it's almost like telling a 13-year-old, you can't do this. They're going to be defiant. 50-year-old's going to be like, what? I'm not going to listen to you. I'm an adult. I know what I know what I choose to do. I know who I choose to associate with. You're not going to tell me how to play my game, or I have to say this or do that or believe this or that. It's ridiculous. But they can control large venues. They can control Gen Con, which, as we've seen from this past year, Gen Con has a much, much bigger problem than the OSR has. All right. And that's something that these same bad actors that are OSR adjacent won't even acknowledge. They won't recognize that. They're not going to bring that up. All right. Gen Con has a huge problem based on what happened at Gen Con 2022. All right. And I know that they're probably, if they haven't already been served, they're probably expecting to get sued over it. All right. I'm not going to spend this time now going into that in detail, but yeah, if you look it up and you look into it a little bit, you're going to see that Gen Con has an issue, and that's a much more toxic environment than anything that's in the OSR. As they lament the colonization of the world by Whitey, they have systematically colorized pop culture franchises one by one. Yeah, and I mean, it's it's not just that. It's not just it's the co-opting of things. Apparently cultural appropriation only goes in one way, and that's something that they worry about, whereas most rational people don't even consider, they consider cultural appropriation as being an acknowledgement that it's something that I enjoy. you know um it's like, I like Chinese food. you know I've even tried to cook Chinese food. That isn't a smackdown on Chinese culture. That's an acknowledgement that I enjoy their food, and I try to cook their food. um can I appreciate Chinese music? Of course I can. Is that appropriation? Yeah, possibly, if I decide that I'm going to, listen to this on a regular basis, and anytime you jump in my car, that's what you're going to hear, playing on the CD or on the radio if you could find it there. But you know what I'm saying? It's like, it's stupid. It really is stupid. The whole idea of it's colonization is just dumb. Has nothing to do with gaming. Yeah, I mean, that's something else. D&D can go away. Still keep on playing RPGs. Modern D&D can go away. I still have, I still have this. I still have this to play. I mean, this book is 40 years old. It's still in near mint condition. All right, and I use it every week for the last, over a year. Every single week running my campaign, I use the actual books. And that's OSR. I mean, that's old school revival. All right, so that's an example of old school revival, actually playing the old games, in their first or second, or it doesn't matter what edition you're playing them in, as long as they're prior to 1990 by my definition, then it's old school. And that's the other thing, when these individuals, outside of the OSR, claim, well, the OSR is going to, slowly die off. You know, I'm 55, all right? So, do I have 30 years left? Maybe. All right. So in 30 years, I die off. Does that mean the OSR dies with me? Absolutely not. Because by 2030, all games made prior to 2000 are going to be OSR. And by 2040, all games prior to 2010 are going to be OSR. OSR, old school role playing, is going to move forward. And this is the proof of that. A couple months ago, I happened to turn on my radio and I says, "Oh, let me hear what's on the oldies channel, what's called the oldies channel, AM channel, and let's see what's playing on the morning oldies." And Motley Crue is playing on the oldies channel. I was like, first of all, it made me feel old as hell when I heard that, and I was like, heavy metal or hair bands or whatever you want to call them, from the 1980s are playing on the oldies channel. All right, it's not the 1950s and earlier anymore. All right, it's practically 1990 and earlier is considered to be oldies. Um, and so as the decades move forward, that concept of the oldies or old school is going to keep on following along with it. So the idea that the OSR is going to disappear just doesn't pan out that way. It's just the wrong way to look at it. You may forget your name, but yeah, as long as there's someone there to give you the right pills to take. Yeah, there is an irony in it because, well, there's only an irony in it because they just have such a lack of understanding of the terms that they're using. And that's where it is. It's like they think that, oh, I'm going to own them by saying this. I'm going to own them by talking about this. And then the one individual is like, oh, thank you for so much for coming to my channel and bringing and making this video explode. All right. I had 200 plus comments. It was 200 comments telling you that you're an idiot. It's not something to hurrah, unless you're just doing it for clickbait, and that's really all it was. And now, that individual chases around at my comments and other channels and bringing up and saying, oh well, because I won't post it on his channel, I won't bring it up there because I know he just wants the clicks. All right, so I talk about it elsewhere on my own channel or whatever, and I'm not going to give him the attention that he wants, and and it's like it's just a better way to, I think, respond to them is to say you're not really a part of this. I'll give you another great example. Gamehole was recently um, approached by someone via email. And that person told Gamehole, uh, you shouldn't have this person running games at your convention. And Gamehole actually looked back, with the person that emailed them, and they looked into their records. I'm assuming because their response would indicate that, and they looked at their current list of people scheduled to attend, and they said, well, thank you very much for your concern, but we've noticed that you've never attended our convention and you're not even currently, a ticket holder for this year's convention. So thanks very much for your concern, but, basically go kickstand. They were much more diplomatic than that about it, but they basically threw it right back at the guy. You're an outsider. You have nothing to do with this. And don't tell us who we can have, simply running games at our, thing. And the person isn't even a guest speaker. It's just, person running games there, which is what conventions kind of need people to do. And so they were like, no, be gone, because you're not even a part of this. All right. You have no stake in this. And if you don't want to attend, don't attend, but don't try to tell us that we can't, again, like I said, you're telling a bunch of, 40, 50, 60-year-olds potentially, this is who you can associate with. Most people are going to say, run along. I'm not going to listen to that, pay attention to that. Teflon Dons. So many great scenes and other inventive materials coming out of the OSR. Yes, and I have made that argument now for a couple of years. The OSR is where the innovation is at. The OSR is where some of your more unique ideas are coming out of. I recently read an article and some statements here and there, and I don't know exactly, because anytime you're reading something, you got to really understand where it's coming from, and so on. And they were saying that some of these larger publishers like Wizards of the Coast or Paizo or Chaosium and others, um, they're farming out their writing. Especially Wizards of the Coast, they're farming out their writing. You know, they're utilizing freelancers much more, to a much greater extent now. They don't have like the staff of writers like old TSR used to have, where they were making almost everything internally, and they might have had some third party sources. Now, the tabletop hobby is just flooded with, with freelancers, and it's flooded with outside, and with self-publishing and everything like that. You're going to find innovation all over the place. Like I said, 9,089 um, titles on Drive Through RPG under the OSR tag. There's a lot of innovation in there. You know, there might also be a lot of stuff that's just not worth your time or your money. There's also a lot of free stuff in there, which is another thing that I think the OSR is oftentimes not recognized for, and that's the fact that the OSR, more than any other entity within our hobby, provides free stuff, whether it be a free quick start, or a free glimpse at what they're currently working on, or whatever. There's tons of free, and then they're finished products. There's a number of companies that will give you their core rule book in PDF for free, and then dirt cheap to buy. I'm talking, basic fantasy, $5 soft cover, free PDF. All right. So, and this is an example of old school Renaissance. All right. Old school content for the most part, with some modern twist to it, and again, provided very, very cheaply, and or even free, and great example of what the OSR does. And as accessible as any game system out there. This is truly new gamer friendly. All right, much more so than anything that Wizards of the Coast puts out. Although D&D Essentials is actually a very good box set for introducing people to it. Pathfinder Paizo puts out a great basic box set. Really, good setup and inexpensive. But even they don't compare to something that you can get for free. Piedar, how's it going? So Glenn, you can say it's dead, but there's always be an old grognards like me in the corner who always run kick-ass old school games. Yeah, and like I said, it's going to advance. It's going to advance forward. So with every new decade, it's going to include an older decade that is now considered old school. That's why OSR cannot die. It's not possible to die, because the 30-year-olds today are going to be the 50-year-olds 20 years from now, and if they're still playing role-playing games, they're still likely playing the role-playing games that introduced them to the hobby. All right, and those games are going to be considered to be OSR. So OSR cannot die. Yeah, reminds me of a comedian that I just watched. He said, an escalator never breaks down. He says an escalator just becomes a staircase. All right, and it's kind of like it's kind of like an old game system. It's like it never stops becoming useful. It just becomes something that you return to every once in a while out of nostalgia, and a lot of times it's still better, or it holds up over time. I mean, I'm still running AD&D first edition, you know, 45 years later. I'm still running the same game I started playing back in 1980, 1980 or 1979. And it's a game system that is evergreen. I don't think that certain modern games today are evergreen. I mean, some of them might be, but most are probably not going to be something that people are going to play for 40 or 50 years, especially if they keep on chasing after the new shiny. And the new shiny is just that. It's new and it's shiny, doesn't mean that it's better. Sometimes it is, but in many cases, it's not better than what you departed. I don't know anybody that thinks that Pathfinder 2 is better than Pathfinder 1. Or it's very rare that you come across anybody that thinks that that was an improvement. No one thought that D&D 4th edition was better than D&D 3.5. Directly led to Pathfinder 1. But it's very hard to find anybody. Now, they might say it was a good system and they enjoyed playing it, but they're not going to say that it's better than the previous editions. They just don't. Gen Con 22, there was an issue with a sexual harassment allegation, and it came from rooming assignments. Let's put it that way, and then a non-responsiveness at the time by Gen Con or by the company that the individual was there to represent. And so and it just became something that like I said, rooming assignments is something that you have to be very, very careful with. And you have to make sure that people that are being forced to room together are fully aware of what the entire situation is. And so that's really what it boils down to, is that it they become the responsible party. Gen Con, at least in my opinion, they become the responsible party for not having acted right outright. Then there was another thing about some internet hack or something like that, maybe an internal security hack, where people were being sent emails saying, well, you might not feel so comfortable being here, because of your race or your color or your, whatever, kind of thing. But that kind of disappeared. Like, they never fully found out who was truly responsible for that hack. And of course, the one side tried to say, oh, it's the OSR trying to scare people off from going to Gen Con, but no proof that it actually happened either. So there were two big controversies going on with Gen Con that that really opens it up. Then a third controversy was that they were going to have this room exclusively for persons of color, or whatever they want to say, and they were going to have a segregated room. And again, that's another issue. It's like, well, if you're supposed to be inclusive, then how do you have a segregated room? So all three of these things hitting at the same time, and yet you don't hear a word about it. But you get some clowns at new TSR claiming to be OSR, and not having produced anything, and then you want to label the entire OSR with that broad brush, and it's like, look at your own house, look at what's going on, you know, um, in your big convention, and yet you're worried about some tiny convention having a guest speaker, or a much smaller convention having a DM that you don't like politically. It's silly, and it's hypocritical. So I just explained it. Devil in Thunderstrike. Love that name. Viatis, how's it going? I love curry. uh, yeah, it's okay. It's kind of overpowering sometimes, though, if they use too much. If a man can be a woman, then I can eat a taco and not feel bad. Okay. Cultural appreciation. Yes, that's really what it is. Is you're not copying something. Unless you're a comedian on a stage, you're not copying something to mock it. You're copying something because that's an appreciation for what it is. And I mean, and again, those that rail against cultural appropriation, they only look at it from one direction. So they don't look at it as in appropriate. I was watching a Facebook, not a Facebook, a YouTube thing with Dr. Phil, and they had this African American English professor who was talking about cultural appropriation, and how it's and he at least admitted that it can go in any one direction, but you shouldn't you shouldn't utilize it, and no one should actually do it. Meanwhile, he's wearing a business suit, and it's like, well, isn't that appropriating you know a Western culture? He certainly wasn't wearing traditional African garb. He was wearing a regular business suit, and so he was culturally appropriating, as he was saying that yes, it does cross all boundaries, and he was at least accurate there, but he was doing it himself, and just not self-aware enough to realize that. Yes, it's a myth. It's more of an appreciation. So I'll go right back here to the commandant's thing. It's a cultural appreciation. The left seem to be colonizers. Absolutely. They are absolutely colonizers in our hobby, trying to infiltrate it. And once they realized that the OSR could not be infiltrated, that's when they stomped off and said, well, we're going to make our own space and leave you to your terrible space. And then they realized, well, but we can't allow your terrible space to keep on going on its own, because our response at the time was, we just want a game. We just want to play the games. I don't care who sits at my table. Anyone can sit at my table as long as they are there to play and they are not an unpleasant individual. All right. So be there to play and don't be a jackass, and we'll be fine. We'll play right through. Not a problem at all. Um, you could be transgendered, you could be gay, you could be black, you could be, Asian, you could be any differentiation of individual, as long as you're sitting at the table ready to play and you're a pleasant individual, doesn't matter to me. I just want my table to be there, and to for all of us to have some fun, pass 3-4 hours of time by chatting, playing, having a good time, and then I'll see you next week. All right. But If you're there to interject, well, I want to see this, I want to do that. Oh, wait, what's the safety tools that are being used? Blah, blah. No, you're here. You're an adult. You're here to play the game. All right, and if you have anything besides that, either keep it to yourself or find a different table, because this isn't the table for you, and that's perfectly fine. So yeah, you're not going to colonize my table and tell me how my table is going to run. You know, you're welcome to sit at my table if you're there to play. First tattoo. I'm not sure what book you're talking about. Um, but hello, Paladins of the Plains. One of the biggest crybabies about the OSR, who complains constantly how the OSR always talks badly about 5e, cannot help himself but talk about the OSR in almost every video. Yeah, and we're talking about a totally different individual there. He's afraid of the OSR, and that's what it is. They're afraid of the OSR. They know that the OSR is the place of innovation. They know that the OSR is the more inclusive and open space, and they know that the OSR is is something that's never going to go away, and that's what really frightens them. Is that if 5e could suddenly lose its 2 or 3 points remaining of the majority market share, because last time I heard it was down to, it was at one time 59% at the height of COVID. It was, so that would have been 2020 to 21, or possibly early into 2000, a little later into 2021. And it was like 59%. And then after that first year and a half or so of COVID, the rest of the market rose up along with it, because COVID was COVID really did help the entire hobby across the board. And they dropped down to about 53% of the market share. So they lost anywhere from 5 to 6 points of market share. And that's something that made them realize, oh wait, this is not they don't want to fall below that 50% line. And it's probably going to happen. Eventually it's going to happen, because the rest of the OSR and indie games as well. I don't want to leave indie games out of the discussion as well. They're all on the rise. They're all producing some of the stuff. They're winning all of these awards, whether you agree with awards or not. They're all rising up and gaining that portion of the market share. Yes, yeah, that's what it was that it was guest presenters on live streams, basically, and that's where it came out of. Like I said, I don't know every single detail of it, so I didn't want to go too much into it. It's just that there were at least 3 controversies revolving around Gen Con 2022. Heavy metal oldies, yes. Yeah, it's scary, General. It's definitely scary. It was a real wake up call for me when I was like, "Holy crap!" I mean, the music that I listened to as a teenager is now on the oldies channel. So the OSR is such a shared experience. Also, young and old players and lovers of the hobby share many of the same memories, characters, and stories. Yes. So I recently went to ShireCon in Connecticut here. It's not that far from me. I'm in New York, but that was in Connecticut, 45 minutes away. I believe they said their number count total was about 93 people. And yeah, a majority of us are probably in our 40s and 50s. Some people maybe a little bit older than that, but not very many. And there were also people in their, you know, 30s, and a couple people brought their kids too, and their kids were maybe in their 20s or even younger than that. I mean, the I know the person running the convention probably had his kids there working the convention, but I guarantee you that those kids play. And at this convention, I think I went through it. There were 23 games. It was only a 1 day convention. There were 23 game sessions run on Saturday, and of those 23, only 1 or 2 game sessions were 5e, heavily modified 5e game sessions. Everything else was either AD&D First Edition, AD&D Second Edition. Those were the 2 games that I participated in. There was some Hyperborea games going on. There was DCC going on. There was just a number of other games going on there. There was at least one Call of Cthulhu game going on as well. But the great majority, like of the over 90% of that convention was non D&D 5e. All right. And so that was, that was an OSR convention. An OSR convention can include 5e as well, but it's going to be predominantly, other game systems out there. And those are the type of small conventions that these on the outside, they can't do a darn thing about them. They're too small. They probably won't even know that they're taking place. And it just leaves us alone to go there and play. There was no drama at this place. There was 14 tables, every table filled with, a DM and players, and everybody just having a good time. And, playing through, bit of a crunch to get lunch, but other than that, I mean, it was a great time, and a great experience to have. It was a very shared experience, and I think that it was a better experience than you would have than at a big convention. All right, because it was easy to just sit and chat with people afterwards. It wasn't like big conventions. Like I go to Comic Cons, which are probably even bigger than Gen Con, and it's like you feel like you're moving through an airport. Everybody in a rush to go around and look, and just so much going on, and just now granted, that's not a gaming convention where you're going to sit down at a table for a couple of hours, but still, I mean, a large convention. The last time I went to Gen Con was 1985. I went to Gen Con 18, and as a kid, I kind of enjoyed that experience, but as an older person, I'd rather have the small convention anyway. So perfectly happy with that. I'm a second generation gamer. Both parents played D&D, etc. I game the old way, and my players feel it. XD, I plan on XD. I'm not sure. Play my own kids as well. The OSR will live for generations to come. Yeah, it'll never end. To be fair, where the issue lies is to say that our clans, and where you had TSR put out a rubbish product that gave native culture and painfully trollish treatment and cashing in on it. Yes, I mean the issue with new TSR and the product in question, or the absolutely legitimate to push back on that and to say this is what crossed your mind when you first saw this. How did you not just kill this immediately? if they had any sense at new TSR, the very moment they saw, um, the very moment they saw Star Frontier's New Genesis, with that proposed idea of the different racial attributes and how they were assigned, um, their intelligent response should have been, uh, get this out of here right now and you're done. Goodbye. Um, so as soon as that was presented, as a draft, they should have had the intelligence to see how horribly bad that was going to look, and rejected it outright and publicly rejected it and said, hey, you know what? We were submitted something that was complete trash, because they had to know that eventually it would get out. That was complete trash. We not only have nothing to do with that, but we have nothing to do with the author as well. That's how they should have handled it. All right. But you know, Lanasa and possibly others there have no business sense whatsoever. They didn't look at it and see it for the problem that it was going to be, and kill it right then and there, and say, nope, this project is done until we get somebody else to write it, or we're just not going to produce it if that's the kind of stuff that's coming. So totally mishandled it, and just didn't have the intelligence of how to respond. Yeah, it's do it right, and do it with just some sense. I mean, that made no sense whatsoever. If Mothers Against D&D were still active, they would use his video as a reason why D&D is bad. Yes. Yeah, there are some, yeah, that particular individual, with the multiple personalities kind of thing, like, that's that's something that Mazes and Monsters was written about. I mean, that movie with Tom Hanks was completely a warning against the disconnect that some individuals can suffer from playing a role playing game. And the response to that isn't, we'll change role playing games. The response to that is, role playing games aren't for everybody. I've said this about the safety tools as well. It's like, if you're coming to me and you're saying that these are the 15 or 20 things that I would be triggered by, or have a deep emotional reaction to, if I came across them, I would hand them back that consent form and say, this is not the table for you, because it's not it's not a therapy session. It's not a place where we can address those kinds of issues. And this is not, potentially this is not the hobby for you. Don't come to me. I'm running a Dungeons and Dragons game, and you come to me and say, well, I can't be around, and this is a real thing. I can't be around uh descriptions of bloodshed. It's like, this is a fantasy role-playing game. There's going to be killing monsters, or whatever. There's going to be bloodshed. um you have certain game mechanics in other fantasy role-playing games where it's like, there's bleeding damage. You take damage over time, you're bleeding. It's like, there's going to be depictions of that, or descriptions of it. And if you can't handle that, then you can't handle this role-playing game. That's perfectly fine. Come back when your head's on straight, when you can handle it. Yeah, I'm Alina. Alina's the is that the cleric from is that's the cleric from D&D BX? Beckme, I should say. I always think of Alita, the battle angel, whatever. The individuals saying that the OSR is dead are not concerned with gaming and present no evidence of their claims other than certain people should not be in the hobby. Yeah, and and they don't apply that. They only apply that on a political sense. They only apply that to people who don't hold their political stance. Like I said, they don't argue uh, against someone because of the way that they play or the game mechanics that they use or the game system that they're using. They're talking about, well, if you don't think that you know biological men should be competing in women's sports, if you don't think that biological men should be using the bathroom, the women's bathroom, then you should be barred from attending this convention center. I mean, that's exactly where they go with it. They're never talking about the game or the game mechanics or even the way that you run the game. They're talking about disconnected politics from the game, so that, or from the hobby. And that's where they're coming from. They're not trying to control the game. So they don't feel that they have to show evidence of gaming as a reason to block somebody from participating. They're using political evidence to utilize that or to try to use that leverage. In my opinion, the availability of OSR free stuff is the one thing that makes the OSR a major player in the hobby. It's the best thing that it brings to the table. Yes, that and the OGL, and the fact that they can, they are free to use game mechanics, to a certain extent, and that they and then that they can look at a number of different game systems and then take the best parts of them and kind of bring them together into one thing makes it makes it much more innovative. They have more freedom to innovate, and that's the other thing, because they don't have they don't have shareholders, and they don't have boards, operating boards, CEO and the, such. They don't have all of that kind of oversight and constraint to what they can mess around with, So I will mention by name. So you have publishers like the Red Room. Uh, they're they're completely wide open. They can put all kinds of, graphic horror or um, you know, a sexual innuendo and that kind of thing, mature materials, all right, advertised as mature materials without any worry about shareholders or some board telling them, some editorial board telling them that, oh no, you can't put this out there. Um, and they have that flexibility, and they're it's shown in their work that they're much more innovative. I mean, some of their layouts are phenomenal. All right. And it's a and that's who this one individual that I started off with, that's who he's attacking. He's like, oh, they're toxic. They're this, the OSR embraces them. And so the entire OSR is like, they're producing good stuff. All right, they're producing adult content, but it's labeled as adult content. Uh, no problem with that stuff. If you have a problem with that, this is not the hobby for you. Stay away from it. Stay away from things that are, clearly labeled. if you don't want to be a part of that. That's fine, but that's not good enough for these types of individuals. They say, not only do I not want to partake in that, but you shouldn't be allowed to partake in it either. And that's where they come from. So they are truly colonizers, in that way, that they're going to stand outside of the hobby that they don't participate in, and then try to control it from the outside and tell who, well, this is who you can associate with, this is what you can say. And if you don't agree with me 100%, then you're toxic, you're a bigot, you're a Nazi, you're this, you're that, you're the other thing, you're all of the different isms that there can be, and you should be banned from participating in anything that is of public nature. Yes, it's political. It's a strategy that wrecks so many other activities and properties. Absolutely. It it practically destroyed the comic book industry. It it has ruined some of the most popular IPs, the biggest IPs. It's ruined Star Wars. It's ruined Marvel Universe. It's ruined it's ruined DC, I guess. It's ruined Lord of the Rings. You can see what they're doing now with Amazon's Lord of the Rings nonsense. They literally don't know how to create any IP of their own. They only know how to take over um, current IPs or IPs of old, and then twist them and destroy them. And then they discard them. They move on to the next thing to ruin. Um, so I think that when they came to the tabletop hobby, they were able to infiltrate WotC, and they were able to infiltrate Paizo, and Chaosium kind of avoided it for the most part. And although they're occasionally bending the knee as well, um, but when they came to the OSR, they were shut down because there was no lead individual or company or whatever that they could infiltrate and manipulate that way. Yeah, actually, Critical Role. I'm going to argue that my guess is that by 2024, Matt Mercer's what is it, Darrington Press, is going to produce their own fantasy tabletop RPG to work fully with their world setting that they already have, and they're going to become a major competitor to Wizards of the Coast and to Dungeons and Dragons in general. That is my honest belief, is that they have the wherewithal. They can attract investors, and they have or he in particular has the charisma to pull it off, and they will attract very good writers. I think they already are decent writers of their own, and yeah, I say by 2024 he's going to drop that, and you're going to see Critical Role becomes a competitor of Wizards of the Coast, whether it's one D&D or whatever they want to call it, sixth edition. Um, they're going to be a number one competitor to it, and probably topple it. And I've also said that if Modiphius ever releases a Elder Scrolls tabletop RPG, I know they're dabbling around with their skirmish game, which is a board game or a tabletop skirmish war game, kind of thing. But if they produced a real tabletop RPG based on based on all of the back content of the video games, they will open up the open up the doors to that video game fandom to come over to the tabletop and play Elder Scrolls as a tabletop. They're not going to get them all, um, but they will attract them uh, much easier than yeah, it's just going to be there for them if they ever chose to do it. Um, because I think that they would get the license. They already own or have already produced things under the license anyway. So I don't think it's, and they've done Fallout. Um, so they've already gotten the Fallout license to do exactly that same thing. It's just tapping into that Elder Scrolls, I think, would be huge for them. And they could certainly take up a good portion of that market share. They're already major competition for Wizards of the Coast as it is. Not as big as Chaosium, but Modifius and Free League are both up and coming, and they produce phenomenal quality stuff, including their artwork. Their artwork is really really good, and their books are solidly made, and for the most part their game systems are very well done. Okay, we'll try to get caught up. The OSR took my lunch money. Yeah, soon the OSR will be eating their lunch too. So take it easy, Glenn. Good to see you again. See you tomorrow at 10 Cars Discord. Yeah, I will pop in there tomorrow night as well. Tomorrow's Thursday. So, yep, I will have time to be in there. I should be home by then. Eat tacos because my people conquered the people who created tacos, plus tacos are good. Hello, DM James. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. People never complain about cultural appropriation of food. Yeah, if you notice that, I guess because most of us Americans are fat bastards anyway, so it's like, you know, uh, but yeah, I think that's it. No one complains about food being culturally appropriated. It's mostly hairstyles and things like that, and that's coming more from that's coming more from women. To be honest with you, I don't think men give a two craps about what other men look like. So yeah, what's going on, bro? And let's see. The crying from the Neo game gatekeepers is ridiculous, but we can ban them. Wah. Yeah, it really is. It's like they accuse us. I'm, you know, I'm not. I'm an apologist for certain forms of gatekeeping. It's like, yeah, if you're coming to my table and you're not there, purposefully to sit down and just play the game, then I really don't want you at my table. Go find someplace else to play. Good luck to you. I hope that you find the table that you're looking for. So, yeah, I will gatekeep to keep people that aren't really there looking to play away from my table. You're not welcome there. If you're going to come to my table and you're going to say, "Well, I really don't see myself represented in your game world," it's like, well, that's a good thing because you're a real human being, and you're not going to encounter any representation of yourself in my fantasy game world. Um, if you want to sit there and stat yourself out and run yourself as a character, we'll see how many combat rounds you survive, and then don't come crying to me, if you didn't survive through a single combat. It's like it's just nonsense for people to come to the table and expect that they're going to see themselves represented in a fictional, fantasy or science fiction setting. um you're not there to play the game. You're there to have your identity reaffirmed, and it's not the place for you. Late to the class. I hope you know Listen, one of my players in my AD&D runs a dispensary, and so he is usually um, he's usually puffing away the entire time. Great player, love to have him, and love to have you in my game as well. So you can smoke your weed during class. To me, the human race encompasses all colors of people. However, think orcs are blacks and so on. How could you live your life thinking like this? I mean, seriously. They're racists. That's how they think of, now you see what a racist thinks like. If someone comes to your table and they say, I see orientation of Africans or African Americans or whatever as blacks, then you know they're racist. And if you're going to make a fuss about the way that orcs are portrayed at my table, you're not there to play. So go find another table. I hope you have luck in finding another table where you'll feel more comfortable. I like that name, prima facie. Uh, if you name him, he may show up. He may be lurking in the chat as we peek. Yeah. Well, there's several people that did come up, and but not by name. So listen, they know this live stream is going. They can pop in. I doubt that they will. But yeah, they can come up. I'm waiting for the Russian porn bots to start popping in soon too, because that usually happens. Hey, this was my idea to do this or to yeah. Well, you know what? I do farm from your channel, OGGM. So I definitely steal from you, and so you can definitely take some of the credit. It was also his idea that the OSR is not dying, and anyone saying that it is a um, it's coming from it from a toxic place to begin with as well. I mean, that's more my words than his, but they're certainly not coming from it in the with the desire or hope to improve the OSR in any particular way. The OSR is not a human improvement engine. Let's put it that way. Role playing the white way, it would not be surprised if he's lurking, leeching off other channels, is how he gets most of his materials for his channel. Yeah, he doesn't really take too much from my channel though. Because I think that he or the other individual, which is far, far worse than he is, um, you know, um, that guy will never take anything from my channel because he knows that I'll respond in kind and and point out, and he actually hides my comments on his channel, so I don't even go to it anymore. um OSR versus the Karening. I'm not sure what Karening. Yes. Yeah, it's Karens. I call them Twitter Karens, or sometimes they call it Sparkle Trolls. But yeah, it is Karening. Yeah, I use so many different platforms that it kind of gets lost. I mean, hopefully Twitter takes a good turnaround tomorrow. So tomorrow, as Elon Musk takes over Twitter, we'll see how much freer the platform becomes for freedom of speech. And we'll see. I already have a test tweet to put out there, and and see whether I get banned or not from it. Like a bomber fighter. Yes, yes. Small conventions where it's back to playing and being cordial is what it's all at. Yeah, I mean, I'm telling you, ShireCon 2022 was awesome experience. I hope to find some others. I might even consider doing like an OSR con like that, and just having it something on the East Coast because they're few and far between on the East Coast, at least from what I can tell. And you know, doing well, especially in the Northeast, there's not that many. And going out to the Midwest or Wisconsin or even parts of Ohio and everything is just such a schlep for me that I'm just not into it. Too far to go. It- yes and no. I mean, you can you only make them a landmine if you accept the fact that they're not scientifically accurate. You know what I'm saying? It's like the differences in the strength modifiers in AD&D First Edition weren't so darn significant, and they really didn't come up that often. It was only in the event that you had a human female fighter who rolled an 18 for strength to begin with, and then rolled a D100, and it was below their cap, and above their cap. All right, and so if you had a female fighter with an 1850 strength, or whatever it is, I'd have to look it up. I actually have the player's handbook in front of me. Um, if I had to look it up, let's do that just so I know I'm not going to get attacked for misquoting something. 1850 is maximum possible strength for a female human or male gnome character. 1875 maximum possible strength for a male elf or female half orc. So if you're playing a female half orc and you rolled anything, first you have to roll an 18, and then anything above an 1875 before you could say, oh my gosh, I don't have the maximum strength I could because I'm being held back because I'm a woman. That's how minuscule the probability of that is. I don't think in my 40 years I've rolled a character with I've rolled more than, let's say, 6 or 8 characters with more than an 1850 strength to begin with. I think I've rolled 18100 naturally twice, and that's it. So it happens so rarely that it's not a big deal. And it's gender attributes, while significantly accurate, you know it's a cultural landmine. It's only a cultural landmine if you listen to stupid people. And that's the problem with it, is that you're listening to people who don't have any real you know perception of things. It's I'd argue that it is worth it, because you know it's worth it because you're standing on a principle that this is something that is a rare occurrence, and it still makes some sense. um just because you're in a fantasy world doesn't mean that everything has to be um so fantastic that reality doesn't play a role in it. um so like the laws of physics still have to exist, otherwise you're playing a superpower game. You're playing a cartoon game, and so there has to be certain things. So I would argue that it is worth it. It's worth it to say, no, this makes sense, and we're using it. You know, Now at your own tables, you could decide, hey, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to have level limits for different racial groups or whatever. That's entirely up to you. But to say that it's not worth it to me to cede against a disingenuous argument. I think small conventions are the way to move forward. To be honest with you, I think small conventions. I think that you'll bring more people to the table with small conventions than big conventions. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that gets back to the argument that was made against, Oriental Adventures. Just a total misunderstanding of what the Oriental Adventures book was all about. It wasn't a cultural appropriation. It was cultural appreciation. It was it was with the best intentions, and so that's why it was a well crafted book, combining many, many different Asian cultures into one thing. And it did have a slew, at least like 10, I believe, Japanese readers. So they didn't use the term sensitivity readers back then, but they had people that kind of read through it and see that it was you know fairly accurate, at least on the cultural aspects of it. The Star Frontiers thing strikes me as high level technology. Yeah, it was just weird. Yeah, it was just stupid. That whole thing surrounding that was kind of stupid. What do you guys think of DMs getting paid, sometimes big money, to run? Hey, you know what? If you're gonna get paid to do it, fine. Yeah, I mean, people are willing to pay you to do that. Fine. Um, I I would feel weird getting paid because I just love DMing. Um, I would never accept it from my set groups, but if you run tables at game conventions, and they'll give you a free ticket and everything, you're technically getting paid to run in that capacity. I don't have a problem with people getting paid if people are out there willing to pay them. Um, I offer my services at DM for free, um, but I won't deny you from getting paid. If a new D6 rules game as an OSR, if it is a if it's still played with an old school role playing aspect, then sure, like kind of like same kind of feel, and you know, I mean, Star Wars, West End game Star Wars is an OSR game. All right, it is an old school game. I think you can't argue that. I mean, I was going to go through and show several things that fall within the OSR. Maybe I'll do that, very quickly. So let me just go through. So AD&D First Edition. All right, this is OSR. This is old school revival, playing the old system itself. Basic Fantasy. This is old school Renaissance. Takes the mechanics of basic D&D, modernizes it, reformats it, changes up a few of its systems, and then puts it out there for you. Swords and Wizardry. All right. Old school Renaissance. Again, old rules, old system, uh, just given some modern twists to it. Lion and Dragon. All right. Old school Renaissance. Again, the attributes, the old systems, those kinds of things are still in this. All right, with a modern twist to it. Uh, much more of a, and as he says, it's a medieval, authentic OSR role playing game. So you are going to get much more of a historical kind of look and feel to running this, and so, but its mechanics are definitely old school. Blue Home is a retro clone, so it's an old school Renaissance game based on the Holmes edition of D&D. And I specifically call it a retro clone because it does harken back to a very specific version of Dungeons and Dragons. For Golden Glory is an old school Renaissance game that goes back to second edition. So this is a retro clone of second edition AD&D. Adventures Dark and Deep. All right. So this is a system that is that's written by Joseph Block, and it's basically AD&D. If you took all of Gary Gygax's articles and posts that he's made on various websites, and then you make some inferences as to where, and predictions where he would have gone with AD&D if he took a step further with it, and that's where you get this. So it's definitely old school Renaissance. It's going back to an older game system, and then it's adding certain new components to it. This is Castles and Crusades. Again, another game system that takes from the old. Actually, Gary Gygax did work with Troll Lord Games in producing this, and this is what Gary Gygax has described as being the natural evolution of AD&D First Edition. So this is what they did produce under that kind of an idea. Now let's shatter the perception that OSR only applies to D&D. So World War II Operation White Box. So this is using the White Hack, and it's based on or inspired by Swords and Wizardry, and it is a World War II, utilization of D&D BX rules. All right, so it has the same attributes and alignment and hit dice and hit points and so on. Well, Dark Places and Demogorgons is basically a kids on bikes kind of format. So more horror sci-fi than just fantasy, so kind of a mixture of that. So again, and it's a throwback to BX. All right. Index Card RPG, definitely an old school Renaissance game, and again utilizing BX rules to it, and just attributes and those kinds of things. Gangbusters BX edition. All right, so again, breaking away from just Dungeons and Dragons. All right, this is made by Mark A. Hunt, and taking Gangbusters and breaking it down to the BX rules of Dungeons and Dragons. Yet you're completely 1920s 1920s Gangbusters game material. Old school, even though it's a brand new product, right? So Call of Cthulhu, second edition box set. This is old school revival. All right. We're taking an old system, and in this case, they reprinted everything. And when you're playing this, you're playing exactly the same game that you were in 1983 second edition Call of Cthulhu. So that's what makes it a revival. It is using exactly the same rules, all right, as old, as the original, but it is a modern printing of an older edition. So those are all of the different examples of OSR that I use when I'm talking about what is the OSR. Old school role playing is the play style and feel. You're going to get old school role playing this, all right, because it is an old school revival and old school role playing at the same time. This, you're going to get that same feel as well. It plays very much like the original Gangbusters, all right, even though the mechanics are slightly different. So it is both Renaissance and it is role playing, and so on. So it doesn't have to be Dungeons and Dragons to be OSR. So you can take a D6 rules game and insert it into a packaging that encompasses OSR as well. And like I said, I mean, I have Star Wars right behind me. I should have grabbed one of these as as my example of non-D&D OSR. Well, it's behind there. I can't get it past the books in front of it. But yeah, so you can definitely use D6 rules. You can apply D6 rules to basic D&D. And now that's a significant change. Let's see, like a remade Star. Yeah, you could remake it, and it would just be a modern interpretation. Maybe some streamlined rules, some different packaging, some different layout and format and such, and that's where you go with it. More mobility school are needed to combat the launch crowd. Okay, lunch crowd. Sorry. Sometimes I think you guys are chatting on a different channel, and I'm not catching. Or does the OSR only meet old D&D style rules? No, I already took care of that. I didn't get to your comment before I said that. I think it counts. Yes. In the AD campaigns I run, the bloodshed and gore only really happen at 2 or 1 hit points. Yeah. I really don't get that involved with it unless the critical, like a fumble or critical strike, has some added effect, like you cut off the person's arm. Yeah, then I'm going to talk about the bloodshed from cutting off the person's arm. If you could still use the OGL, weird guy, you could still use the OGL, and that's what really protects you from because they cannot copyright a game system, and they certainly can't copyright a style. So the only thing they can copyright is very unique words or terms that are used. Like you cannot make a game and use the beholder and it looks exactly like a beholder, acts like a beholder, but you can use the name beholder, but you can call it floating eyeball monster and you'll be perfectly fine. All right. So Yeah, you definitely could utilize that, and I think you'd be fine without getting sued, unless the individual is very litigious, which I don't know um, how how litigious he is. Litigious or litigious, I think it is the word. Technically, you can't copyright rules. Yes, I keep on like I should read like 5 comments and then come back. Yes. Yeah, so Alina, the one killed by Bargle. Am I that far behind on comments? All right, let me try to get caught up. Yes, it might be. Um, they all came around like the roughly the same time, and they certainly borrowed ideas, here and there. Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, some games are so incredibly, you know, changed that they become like totally unique. Um, I don't think that if you just use the 6 attributes, that automatically makes it OSR. Um, but I think that if you if you're it certainly doesn't make it old school. Well, it's certainly not old school revival. It might not be enough to make it old school renaissance by just having the attributes. Could it be old school role playing? Yeah, absolutely. Because old school role playing is the type of play and the feel that it kind of generates around it, its essence. Um, so that's fine. But is it a revival? No. And is it renaissance? That's where the question comes in. Is it old school renaissance if its rules are changed so much that it really does play like a different game, then it's probably not OSR. Yes, DM James. I think it's more of a percentile dice system, and TSR was moving towards that too. I mean, that's that's what they created with Star Frontiers. That's what they did with TSR Conan. Worked more on the percentile system, which I think is more like Rollmaster. Rollmaster was all percentile, I'm pretty sure. I've only tried playing Rollmaster once, and um, character creation in Rollmaster was the most tedious 3.5 hours, and I still gave up on using up all the points. That was a brutal, brutal system. All right. So let's see. We're speaking German, so yeah. You know what? They've made it, John Scott. They've made it so overused that it's become cartoonish. It's like, all right, whatever. It's like the way that the word racist is thrown around. Yeah, okay, whatever. That's the natural response. When you just hear it, and that's really, like I said, that's how the OSR people in the OSR, or people that consider themselves to be part of the OSR, when we hear these kinds of attacks, that's the best way to respond. Yeah, yeah, whatever. Shoo them away like you know how kids would how kids would respond to you. I was a school teacher for 26, almost 27 years, and I've had students, former students of mine, say like when I taught my classes, it was as if I never really, if the students disagreed with me, or the students or even were disrespectful, or whatever, I never really let it get to me And I said, because I never really, I never put anything into what their insults or what their disagreements had. If I knew that what I was doing wasn't what I was being accused of, or if I knew I was right and they just, needed to be shown a different way of thinking about it or whatever, I Hey, if you're still there, wow, that was really weird. Just had a hiccup, an internet hiccup, and I see we're still running live, so hopefully that hiccup didn't interfere too much with it. So let's move on. I don't know. Let's see. I want to say Bloodworth is flexing, showing off all his OSR, but I know he is just an enthusiastic collector. I have a few of these games, but not that many. Um, Virtually every game I showed, I actually played or ran. Um, but yeah, there are some game systems that I do have that that I haven't had the chance to play yet. Hopefully, hopefully in time I will get around to, doing, running most of what I do have. But yeah, virtually everything I showed you I've actually run. So um, let's see. What else did I lose? Uh, yeah, let me just try to get caught up on this because I don't know. My internet was a little bit fuzzy for a second there. Basic Fantasy, Mini Bear, Mini Six Bear Bones, Dungeons and Delvers, Dice Pool, as well as a few niche games. Yeah, I have a few of those. Obviously, Basic Fantasy, Mini Six Bear Bones. I don't. Dungeons and Delvers, I do have the Dice Pool one. I think that's the kids version one. Um, which I've spoken to the creators of that, and I was like, they were like, oh, well, that's the kids version. I was like, oh, okay, I like that version anyway. Um, let's see. Yeah, I'm not sure where we're up here. So rumors have it that Adventures Dark and Deep is the true second edition. Well, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure Joseph Block says that it's what would have come after second edition. and then Castles and Crusades again is what Gary Gygax, along with Trollord Games, but really Gary Gygax was the one that said that that is the natural successor of AD&D First Edition. So he kind of discounted Second Edition because Gary really had nothing to do with Second Edition. It was after he was removed from. It was after he was removed from TSR. Okay, let's see. I think Layrith the Beautiful isn't good enough. Yeah, like I said, some people they're talking about villains and adding villains, I guess. Yes, it froze. Yeah, it froze. I lost my internet connection briefly, so hopefully it's back and it's still running. It still says live 1 hour and 56 minutes, so I'm hoping that it's all one big thing. Hopefully that little hiccup didn't cut the feed, even though it stopped. Yeah, sorry about that, Lionel. It just all of a sudden just came to a stop. Yeah. It happened in our game yesterday too. So it's been a thing going on with the internet, I guess. Maybe has to do with Hurricane Ian working its way up the East Coast or whatever. Um, yeah, I know it's good now. And like I said, hopefully it didn't like separate and create um two different live streams, kind of thing. So yeah, so DM James, now they hear. So DM James is the role playing the right way. I know you were certainly engaging in that one YouTube channel that's not an OSR channel, who was attacking, the OSR and basically saying the OSR you know, is is a toxic place because we are not, we're not calling out the two or three people that are problematic and such. And I mean that was the main thing. And I know I left several posts on your channel, and then he went and followed up on them there as well. So I'd rather give you the traffic than him on his. But yeah, I mean it's just these individuals are really sad, because they see the OSR as a threat, um, and he's not even looking at it as a threat to gaming. He's looking at it as a threat to his political ideology. Um, so there he comes from the perspective of I don't want to leave you to just being able to play your games. I want to be able to prevent you from playing your games because you don't have the same politics that I have. Now the other individual that we both view his channel, um he's just more so, well, the OSR is not D&D 5e, and therefore it has no value. And that's again coming from a position of fear, I think, because at some point D&D 5e, probably when they finish doing whatever they're doing with Dungeons and Dragons 6th edition, uh, you know the populace is not going to follow from 5e to 6e. Some of them are going to break off and continue playing 5e, or look to other places because they'll find that Wizards of the Coast left them behind and went in a direction with the game that they're just not willing to follow. Um, I was watching a video from Tenkar that I think he put out yesterday that you know, Tankar was talking about. It was a comment made by I think his first name is Chris Cox, who is the CEO of Hasbro. Basically said, and you can go to Tankar's channel to pick it up even better than I'm going to probably restate it, but they're really putting they're really putting all their eggs into the digital basket. They think that the direct sales from both Wizards of the Coast and direct sales of hard copies that are bundled with digital, coming directly from Wizards of the Coast, is going to be the way that they go in the future, and that's leaving behind the small stores. That's leaving behind the the Targets and the department store kind of sales as well. They probably won't leave behind Amazon because that's the biggest way to purchase things from. But they really want you to just use their, and that's what One D&D stands for. One D&D is not the unification of all Dungeons and Dragons. It does not do anything to end editions. That's just, that's just pie in the sky, refusal to actually listen to what they say. All right. They've actually explicitly said that One D&D is only backwards compatible to 5e, and more people that are much more fluent with 5e than I am are coming out and saying it's barely compatible, backwards compatible to 5e. The changes that they're making, or at least suggesting to make, are so different than what 5e does that it's not even the same game anymore. It's a new edition. All right. Anytime you've changed that many different essential rules, it is no longer just a revision. It's a new edition. If they change enough of the rules, it actually becomes a whole new game. And that's what I think they're afraid to say out loud, is that we're going to go in a completely new direction, and that's what they're afraid of. And yes, I do dead name. All right, I dead named the new edition. So, and we know all about that particular rant. Was you are dead naming if you say 6th edition. I will say 6th edition until I see evidence to state otherwise. And what I'm seeing so far is enough changes that it's no longer 5th edition. Yes, 5e post Tasha's is barely backwards compatible with the original core 3 books of 5e. Tasha's really, like, to me, Tasha's is where it's no longer D&D. Once you incorporate Tasha's, it becomes a different game than what Dungeons and Dragons is. That's when it becomes WotC's fantasy role-playing game 3rd edition. All right. So they took over with 3rd edition, 4th edition, 5th edition, and 5th edition is their 3rd edition of the fantasy role-playing game that they're producing. Now they could slap on a label of D&D on it, but as the OGGM one time put out, Wizards of the Coast has the ability to put D&D on a bagel and say, this is what D&D is, and you can't argue against them because they own the IP. So they own the name D&D. So, and they can slap that on whatever they want. That doesn't make it the same game system that Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax put together, and others prior to, after that, continued on with that legacy. No, they absolutely came out and said, it's not that. Well, I think it is disingenuous because he does not want to admit that everything that they say is what they are actually intending on doing. So it crushed his whole theory that because it is in Magic the Gathering, it is now canon to Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, or will be canon in Dungeons and Dragons 6th edition. He doesn't understand or want to admit that there are limited use contracts that companies make with each other that allow their IP to be used in a very specific way with a very specific product, but not any other product line that is held by that same company. So just because Disney allowed for there to be a Star Wars set in Magic the Gathering doesn't mean that because Wizards of the Coast owns Magic the Gathering and owns Dungeons and Dragons, that they can take Star Wars characters from Magic the Gathering and put them into a source book for Dungeons and Dragons 5e or 6e. If they ever did that, they would get sued within an hour. There would be a lawsuit filed. All right, they would get a cease and desist order. They would be sued. They'd be sued up to yin yang. All right, for stealing their copyrighted material and utilizing it, violating the original order, the original license. All right, and it would probably pull the license in response to it and say, no, you can't even use this former license because now you've abused it. You've broken the terms of that limited use license. There are Rude Dog Flex. Welcome, by the way. I don't recall having seen you before. I went to Roll20 and I just typed in OSR and I came across 35 pages of current games being run on Roll20 with just the keyword OSR on it. So I'm sure that if you put in OSR and or OSE, you will find groups. Also, you can go to Facebook. OSE will have a community there, probably several communities with thousands of individuals, and you will find players there. I have, as an OSR GM, I have never had a problem filling my table with a backlog of people in a waiting list when I'm running AD&D First Edition. I haven't had a problem gathering players for Castles and Crusades. So you will not have a problem finding players for Old School Essentials, especially if you advertise looking for players on Roll20 or on any of their probably number of Facebook pages. Now, the only reason why I don't have OSE is because by that time I already had like 5 different versions of D&D Basic. And I said, do I really need a sixth? To me, it just wasn't, something that I needed. I already had, just picked up Swords and Wizardry, the collector's box set. So I didn't need another one. I have plenty of, and I'm still running the old, right from the old books anyway. So I didn't need that. But again, you will find plenty of players if that's what you're looking for. It's DMs that are hard to find, not players. Yes, yes. Everything is D&D. Everything is D&D. Scooping ice cream is D&D. Humping dogs in the park is D&D. Yep, that's absolutely something that that particular individual will conflate everything, and it's to such an extent that I think his view of things is so warped that I mean completely unrelated things become Dungeons and Dragons to him. So I'm waiting to watch Hocus Pocus 2 and see if any of that is even remotely related to what he's talking about. But you know I've seen Hocus Pocus 1 a number of times, and it's entertaining. It's whatever. It's a kids movie. Um, so I don't think that any of those three witches are evil because they use the very tropish, oh, they're looking to eat young children, bake young children and cookies and stuff. That's childish stuff. That's the regular trope. There's nothing, oh, they're evil because they're looking to eat children. Um, it's cartoonish, and it's expected. That's a normal thing. There was another trope, and I won't remember it now, that he seemed to not really pick up on, and I was like, no, that's just in the same movie where Winifred Sanderson, I think is her name, the one played by Bette Midler, is looking inside a house, and the people sitting in the house are watching Hocus Pocus 1 on it, and he tried to make it sound like that it's such a massive storytelling, this has never been done before. And it's like, no, that's a very common trope. They've done that in every Scream, almost every Scream movie has them looking and listening to and watching the other Scream movies, in the series. It happens all the time. That's a very Hollywood thing. It's tongue in cheek. It's meant as a joke. It's not meant as a, you know, it's meta. It's to see if the audience picks up on it. It's partly audience service too, to do that. So it doesn't have any deep meaning behind it. It's a joke. Yeah, I mean, what got me into back into tabletop role playing games is, and I've told this story a few times, is that I had backed the Kickstarter for Pathfinder Online. At that time, from like 2002 to 2014ish or so, I was completely immersed in MMOs. That was my whole thing. So I had taken like 20 years off from tabletop role-playing games, and shifted right over to console games, and then computer games, and then to MMOs and such. So I was going through, and I was preparing to get into Pathfinder Online. I backed it at a high amount, like $400 or something like that. I was, backed in with like, 2 years prepaid and all kinds of stuff in it. And it was on the Paizo forums where someone actually said, Captain Marsh came out and said, "Hey, there's this tabletop role playing game that we all need to rise up and join forces to crush." And he mentioned Mifrog. It was a mythic fantasy role playing game. So it's a role playing game that was authored by Varg Vikernes. Um, black metal, killed somebody, killed one of his bandmates, and, supposedly burnt down churches in Europe, and was serving in prison, and, was accused of being a Nazi, and blah, 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 the whole 9 yards. All right. And then the guy after prison came out of prison after 17 years and made this role playing game. So the guy was like, "Oh, we should ban him because he's an ist, and he's this and that and the other thing." And so I was like, being somewhat contrarian myself and confrontational, and I never liked people telling me what not to do. And I like to be, informed myself before I make opinions. I was like, well, let me take a look at this and see what he's talking about. When people telling me to boycott something. And it was like the earliest instance of like cancel culture I've seen, so that was like 2014, 2015. And so I was like, let me look into it. And I looked into it, and I was like, wow, this game is only $10. I says, you know what, for $10, I'll read it and look through it. And I didn't see any of the stuff. I mean, it was basically like, orcs are black people kind of inferences that they really made from it. And I read it, and I was like, all right, well, yeah, I could see some of the anti-Christian stuff in there, but if the guy's a pagan, he's going to have that worldview. So I kind of get that, but the game system itself, because I looked at it in a very academic way, I was like, the game system itself is not that bad. And then I started running it, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And that's how I got back into tabletop role playing. Then I immediately started rebuying back all of my old stuff that I sold off in like 2000 when I got married, and I sold everything off that I did have, and now starting from 2014, 15, I started rebuying back everything that I unfortunately sold off at a significantly higher price, obviously. So, but it's when these individuals or whatever say, "Hey, stay away from that thing. Don't do that. Don't look at that." That's what makes most people who are inquisitive, well, let me take a look at it and I'll judge for myself. All right. And that's another thing that those individuals on that side, they can't stand, is when you say, "You know what? I'm going to look at it myself and form my own opinion. I'm not going to accept what you're telling me. I'm going to look at it and judge it for myself and then decide." So that's how I ended up back into the tabletop role playing hobby, is by somebody telling me not to look at the tabletop role playing hobby, or at least that aspect of it. Yep. Yeah, and I mean, I gave, and that's the other thing that I've said to this other individual on his YouTube channel. I've played 5e before. It's just not a better game for me than AD&D First Edition, or it's not better for me than Castles and Crusades. I just don't like it. Yes, it's still going. If you're talking about this, it is still going. It hiccuped and then got back. So I don't know how much it interrupted the flow of it. I am checking to see when I get a call back that my car is done with its inspection. So that's when I will end it. Yeah, which is fine. You know what? It's fine if they are, it's like newspapers. Newspapers are written for the fifth grade reading level. Um, because most people don't want to just dig in that deeply anymore. Um, they just want real quick, very easily accessible, and and move on from there. I think that many of um the new adventures of 5e uh does really have a presentation that's to a much younger audience maturity wise, and even though it's not really meant for that. I mean, they say 12 plus or even 10 plus, but they really mean that it's for, people in their late teens, early 20s. But there's a huge, at least I've been told that demographically there's a huge drop off after mid 20s for 5e. Um, people just move on to, either they leave the hobby altogether or they move on to the OSR from 5e. So once they kind of see, like, you know this is Dungeons and Dragons with training wheels on it. That's when they move on to other things, and they discover the OSR in most cases. Yeah, I lost service for like a brief moment. Same thing that happened in my Castles and Crusades game yesterday that Takata was in, and several of our other people kind of lost service as well. So we ended up just running with 3 players instead of the 5 that we were scheduled for. Yeah, I mean, yeah, DM James, but when you look at, like, if you're looking at it from a Northern European pagan perspective, I can understand. Um, you know, I mean, most of that was from the Romans who adopted Christianity and then kind of spread it by the sword, kind of thing. I'm sure the Spanish Inquisition didn't help. You know, those Roman Catholics did not treat Northern European pagans very well. Um, so I can understand the animosity. Um, has no bearing on the game itself, though. So, yeah, I'm sure he hates. Surprisingly, he hates Christians more than he hates Muslims, because he spent quite a good deal of his youth um, in Iraq. Uh, I think when his father lived in Iraq, was working, oil companies or something in Iraq. And so yeah, he doesn't have that same, even though Muslims didn't treat um, Eastern Europeans very well when they invaded. So um, yeah, but I at least I get it. Um, any other isms that he has, it's, I don't have to agree with it, or like it. I can separate the artist from the art. um Musically, I don't even like black metal. Like, I can't understand the words, I don't like it. um but so I don't have to like that aspect of the art. It's like, I don't care, I just don't like it. But his game system is not a bad system. Yes, you do, Indigo. You need to get Castles and Crusades. Um, that's a that I would strongly suggest everybody take a look at. Now, I'm a huge proponent for Castles and Crusades. Yes, they are not deep and complex. Absolutely not. You're right. And deep and complex doesn't mean that you're rolling on a chart and it tells you what is deep and complex as well. So it's like now if I can role play. I don't have to, you know, I don't need dice to tell me what my character feels or thinks or what relationship my character has with an NPC. I can actually role play that because I'm an old school role player. And that's how we ran our games back then. We don't need, what is it, complex mechanical rules for social interaction. We've been doing that crap for 40 plus years without there being dice rolls and charts for that. It's called role playing. Yeah, so Takado's talking about, so we almost had a group wipe in our first session yesterday with Castles and Crusades, and it was just on the tails of the other individual's whole thing about TPKs, and if you have one, you're a bad dungeon master, and if you've never had one, then you're a bad dungeon master, and if it was kind of like a bizarre like timing of it all because I was like, oh my gosh, we nearly had a group wipe in our very first running of Castles and Crusades. It was three first level characters, a ranger, a druid, and a cleric against three goblins, straight out of the box, the box stat goblins. And they just rolled terribly, and Ducato actually fumbled and twisted and popped his knee, and he was crippled for a week, having lost the use of his knee, and the druid was reduced to -1 hit points from 2 arrow hits, and fortunately the ranger, it wasn't until she finally killed the first goblin that it's like, okay, maybe this will now start turning. All of the player characters missing their shots and everything, and then she finally killed the second one, and then Takato's cleric finally managed to kill the third. But it was like touch and go whether or not it was going to be a total party wipe. And then later on that evening, with my AD&D campaign, and my group of 8 players there, almost 2 of them were killed with a dragon breath weapon. They had to make their system shock rolls, or otherwise they could have died instantly as well. So it was definitely an old school day of gaming yesterday for me in 2 separate systems, 2 separate game sessions, different players for the most part, and it was just a great day, because there were so many close calls, and just a lot of fun. That is what old school role playing is about. It's about just like really feeling like you're in the moment and there's real risk taking place. That's the Roman Empire. I don't know if that's a play on words, um, but we civilized the poor masses. Yeah. Yes, Cal. It should definitely be on your list. I just got RuneQuest. Yeah, I got RuneQuest as well. The new box set. Haven't run it yet. I actually have to sit there and read through it. I just did a box opening video for it a while back, and just haven't had time to play it yet, or give it a real solid read yet. Um, I have finally really understood Ascending Armor class from Castles and Crusades, Rude Dogflicks. And I have to just think about target number. And when I use the term target number, then Ascending Armor class works perfectly fine. Mentally, I can wrap my head around it. So I have to use the term target number. And Castles and Crusades really should, instead of having a DC and DL, uh, difficulty, um, challenge and difficulty level or something. They use two of the same, or virtually same term, to mean two very different things, and um, I prefer target number rather than difficulty check. Um, so, but yeah, ascending really became understandable to me because I was hard, like, just hardwired for descending armor class, and I never liked ascending armor class until Castles and Crusades, and I was like, oh, okay, now I get it. Yeah, that's right. The ranger got dropped down to 4 hit points. She was one arrow shot away from being killed herself, and or at least incapacitated herself. And yeah, it was close, you know. And I mean, didn't really say that, rules wise, that you couldn't continue fighting even though you lost the use of one knee. So I just had you fighting, you know, fighting from your knees. And so you might have, but if she didn't kill that second and she got down, you would have never survived against two goblins. So yeah, it was an awesome, awesome, just against three goblins, three first level characters, had an awesome combat. Didn't last incredibly long either, but it was, just on the edge of your seat kind of action going on. Yeah, I mean, it's just basically you just add whatever you need if you're going below to hit armor class 0, and you subtract whatever you need from, going above it. Um, it's really just keeping in mind what's my target number. But you still have to look at a chart with THACO, unless you just keep it in your mind really well. Um, what I like about Castles and Crusades is that you don't need a chart at all for combat. You just know what you need to hit, and and that's it. There's no You don't have to do any kind of cross referencing at all. So let's see. So let me go back to a banner real quick and see if we have hit everything. So the OSR is doing just fine. I think based on what everyone has already mentioned here, I think that we've kind of proven our point, and we've debunked enough of the arguments against it. We've also kind of, I think we've better defined what the OSR is, so that, hopefully, people looking in that weren't familiar with the OSR, now that there's three different ways of looking at the OSR. And I'm sure other people might disagree, or other people might come in and say, well, no, there's four or five ways. But I think that, I'm going to stand by my definition, and I think that it's fully usable, for anybody to understand. Old school role playing is the way and style of how you're running the game. Old school Renaissance, new game, using old game system, so with some new game mechanics, and then old school revival actually playing the older game. All right, so I'm taking something that I played back in 1983, and I'm playing exactly that version of the game. That's old school revival. All right, I'm reviving the old way and the old game, and so that's, I think, the biggest stumbling block is to better express what the OSR is, and um, that way people, are kind of prevented from attacking it for what the OSR is not. The OSR is not a community. All right. The OSR is not a single, a single entity that can be controlled and manipulated. Um, the OSR is not small. There are tens of thousands of people involved, if not more involved. There's tens of thousands of tables running OSR games. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of players in the OSR. The OSR is not just a derivative of Dungeons and Dragons. It's not, only games that are fantasy role-playing games. The OSR is older editions of Call of Cthulhu. The OSR is modern interpretations of gangbusters, or a modern take on um, the what was that? I just drew a blank. Top Secret. All right, so there's Top Secret New World Order. It's an OSR game. It's based on an older game, so that's perfectly fine. You see, there are just so many different ways of looking at the OSR that many of these people from the outside, they're just seeing it as one thing. You know, it's even when they attack it, or they attack the players, oh, you're just playing these crusty old games, right? And there's you can't grow with running these old games, because they fail to recognize that old school Renaissance games are modern mechanics that are going to appeal to younger players. And then once you get them in on playing, these other game systems, then you could start introducing them an old school revival to playing some of the older systems. You know, I have, and I've said this many times, I've probably introduced about 40 people to D&D BECME and AD&D over these last 30 years, 3 years, I'm sorry, over these last 3 years, about 40 people. In all of those individuals, only 2 have come out and said, I prefer 5e. And they left my game to go back to playing 5e. Only 2 out of between 30 and 40 people that I've introduced to either D&D BECME or AD&D First Edition. And many of my players, had been away from the gaming, and when they came into my campaign, especially my AD&D campaign, they were like, "Oh my gosh, it finally feels like I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons again." All right, because they weren't getting that feel, that old school role playing feel from playing 5e. All right, it really is a very different game when you play it that way. I've also said on this other individual's YouTube channel, I actually said the only really positive experiences I had playing 5e is when those individual DMs stripped so many of the rules that are strictly 5e out of it, and really ran it more like it was AD&D Second Edition. I was like, if you're going to do that, you might as well just play AD&D Second Edition. You know, that's telling me that 5e isn't really the system that you think it is. And so that's, just the way it is. Yeah, Takano is method acting. So yes. All right, let's see. Ironically, I was recovering from an injury to both my knees at the gym. Well, yeah, it was really an awesome scene in our game. Um, Gyms are dangerous. The last gym injury I actually had was when I was lifting, and then I could no longer fully extend my arm anymore. I had pulled a ligament or a muscle or something, and I couldn't straighten out my arm. Yes. Yeah, I told him I can no longer take that seriously. That's a shenanigans DM. If you're putting Optimus Prime, having tea with Elminster in Strixhaven, just because on Optimus Prime is in Magic the Gathering as a card, and you somehow linked all those worlds together, um, and then Optimus Prime is now canon in D&D 5e. Yeah, that is completely delusional. And it's shenanigans. It is a DM shenanigans player. Even younger, like, so I'll give you an example. So at ShireCon, our second edition game that we played at ShireCon, the guy had so the DM had us. It was kind of like an Alice in Wonderland's kind of inspired thing, but we were all transformed into Muppets. And so we still had the same character classes and those class abilities, but we were all Muppets. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, it was a unique twist. It was kind of, it was kind of corny, and but it was funny. But it was a convention play, one shot. You could do anything you want. You could do any of that shenanigans in a convention setting. But if you're building it around, like this is going to be in your serious campaign, then you're a shenanigans DM. You're playing like you're a child. Um, and that's where I kind of went. I was like, this is silly. I mean, it's not the way. And he says, well, I said, I run my games in a more serious way. And he says, well, yeah, you're like me. You don't run games to have fun. I said, no, we had a great deal of fun. That's the other thing. He doesn't think that you should run games to have fun. Uh, no, we had a great deal of fun. I think we had a great deal of fun yesterday. When your whole group almost got wiped. The fact that you actually pulled it out, and it was a lot of fun. Um, and if it wasn't fun, we probably wouldn't get back together again, next Tuesday to play. So it has to be fun. That's what Gary Gygax actually said was the most important thing. You have to have fun. Otherwise, what's the point? So yeah, it was funny. Yep, you dove right into playing the part. And that was the first time I was using that critical failure table too. It was an awesome game session. It was so much fun. We had to modify it because two players lost their connection. You know, um, so I toned it down to only three goblins against them three, and just failed initiative rolls and failed attack rolls, and it just kind of snowballed. It almost almost wiped them out, and then they slowly started coming back, and it was tremendously fun. Yeah, yeah, run them through and run it, you know, run it no holds barred. I mean, you roll everything. The other thing that I started doing probably about a year ago or maybe more is all of my rolls are public now. So players can see all of my attack rolls. The only thing I roll on, behind the screens, per se, is to roll like surprise checks and saving throws of monsters and those kinds of things. But anything that's involving direct combat with the players, then they see every roll. Yeah, or mortar oil. Yeah, DM probably. He's a shenanigans DM. He gives out rare magic items like candy, and has NPCs jump in to save the day anytime that they run into a real challenge. He only runs 2-hour sessions and runs campaigns that are only 4 weeks long. What are you doing in 8 hours? Yes, yeah, it was a tough night for everybody last night. It really was. Um, or yesterday morning. Yeah, absolutely was. How dare you have fun? No, you can't have fun. I mean, Gary Gygax says in the first paragraph, you know, you need to have fun. Have fun with it. Yeah, I'm going to actually wrap up, but thank you also, Rude Dog Flicks. Great having you here. Everybody else, thanks for hanging in there. I know that little blip took about 10 people out. So thanks for hanging on for a little bit while I got my internet back up again. And yeah, it was a great discussion. And once again, I think that we have fully debunked the idea that the OSR is dying or is dead, and that the OSR has to really concern itself with a handful of toxic players, all with one company. Now we don't have to worry about that, and the OSR will always be around because the OSR is ever moving forward with the rest of the hobby as well. I run 5e raw with one house rule for sure, which would change the XP requirements for the first 5 levels, so it takes longer to level up. 5e core cheapens low level gaming. Yeah, I would also get rid of death saves and short rests, and certainly those are the two things that I would also remove from 5e. And I would remove um I would remove some of the background skills. The one thing I always got with 5e was that there's just too many layers of actions. There's too much action economy going on there. There's too many backups for your initial failure to keep on falling back on and everything. I just don't like it. It's like playing a video game, which is fine if I'm playing a video game. But when I'm playing a tabletop, I want something a little bit grittier and more risky. Okay, thanks a lot to Ducato. I will see you next Tuesday. And great chat. The same. Great chat, everyone. You all have a great afternoon. And I look forward to seeing you on the gaming screen sometime soon. And, keep on pushing the OSR out there. Keep on introduce new players to the OSR, especially those that are, bogged down with playing vanilla 5e. Or who aren't going to move on to 6e when that eventually happens. And so, the OSR is here for those people that are not going to move forward to D&D 5e, and they're going to look for something that is a little bit more in line with with the game systems that aren't going to leave them behind. And Indigo, but then I ran 5e. It wouldn't be D&D. It would be Ruins of Zamborian and the Adventures of the Middle Earth or Stargate. Yeah. Everyone have a great day. I'm going to wrap it up. Have a good one. Take care.